We did have mosquitoes to help kick white people out. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to SSRG Research Stories. I am here with a wonderful scholar, Dr. Hoselton, and today we'll be talking about her publication titled From Discomfort to Accountability, Exploring an Ethical Relational Approach to Teaching Anti-Racism and Decolonization in Canadian Introductory Social Work Classroom, published with the Journal of Social Work Practice. But before I start with the first question, I want to invite Jill, or Dr. Hoselton, to properly introduce herself and let viewers know who she is. Over to you.
Hi, Prince. Thanks so much for having me. And I should say, I am not a doctor yet. I'm still on that long journey.
Projecting.
Yeah. But I'm so happy to chat with you today. And just acknowledge too, this was a collaboration between the two of us, but I'm happy to talk about the article myself. But would love just hear your input as well. So just a little bit about me. I am located in Edmonton, Alberta, on Treaty 6 territory. So that's in the western part of Canada. There's the landscape prairies. There's mountains not too far away, not as close to where you are, Prince.
And bears.
And bears. There's lots of wildlife, coyotes in my front yard, but in a city nonetheless. And yeah, I've been practicing in social work for, I was calculating this in my mind, but nearly 20 years, which, makes me feel a little bit old. And yeah, my most formative experience, I would say, was in the field of child welfare. I've worked in a lot of different areas, but child welfare most formatively. And my experience there really inspired me to further my education, to do my master's in social work. And then currently now I'm working on my PhD, which, as I said, is a long journey. And then part of my practice in social work now is also social work education. So I've been teaching for a number of years now, and I think that's really the most formative part of the conversation today.
Fantastic. So can you start by telling us why you chose to do this study? What's the aim of this study?
Well, I think this study sort of was twofold. For one, there was an opportunity because it was a co-teaching experience, and that is not the norm. So usually you just have one teacher in a course, but there was two teachers assigned. One was myself, one was yourself. And we both have such unique positionalities. And we saw that as an opportunity to really engage in teaching students about anti-racism and decolonization from those unique perspectives. Additionally, just the sort of tensions and challenges I think instructors are facing in teaching sort of these really, really important discourses to students. We're just really in social work just trying to figure out what's the best way to do this. Our classrooms are increasingly diverse. I was just thinking, in preparing for this in the summer, this exact same course, I had students from Sri Lanka, I had students from India, students from Nigeria, students from South Africa, students from Canada, students from the United States. It's just, so diverse. And so we bring people together. And this was just an opportunity to really explore that.
So before I ask about the main findings, I'm curious, can you, explain more why it's important to adopt a decolonial or anti-racist approach to teaching the introductory social work, or why it's important to teach about it too in the course at the introductory level?
Yeah, absolutely. And great question. So social work as a profession is in Canada is really rooted in Western philosophy and ways of knowing. And a lot of that is also rooted in just the settler colonialism that is a part of Canada. And so, and that's sort of history in Canada that a lot of people might know a little bit about, but isn't part of necessarily the dominant narrative of Canadian history. Importantly, too, Canada social work specifically had a role in the Indian residential school system. So we were implicated. We were actually part of of removing Indigenous children from their homes, separating them from families, and putting them into residential schools. So we have this really like strong call
Sorry,
to.
can you talk a little more about the residential school system because of audience who do not have an idea of what happened in North America with regards to that?
Yeah, so in Canada, when settlers arrived in Canada, and this was sort of like the role of the government, there's sort of like a twofold thing with settler colonialism, and that sort of implicates Indigenous people and Black people as well. So Indigenous people had these really strong ties to the land. They knew the land best, and so they were deemed as like deeply threatening to the settler colonial state. And so the genocidal practices that impacted Indigenous people was demonization of their spirituality, family separation, which was through the Indian residential school systems, which I'll return to, assimilation practices, and so forth. And then the part that impacted Black people in settler colonialism that we talk about less in Canada, but is equally critical, is the transatlantic slave trade and how Black bodies were instrumental in their labor in building what is known as the settler colonial state. And so then you see those practices, how it impacted those populations. That's like sort of leaked, or I should say flooded into the present, and still impacts those demographics today. The Indian residential school system was pivotal in the breakdown of Indigenous families. So the church had a strong role in this. Social workers, the government, children were removed from their communities and put into boarding schools. And within those boarding schools, children were subject to a variety of abuses, sexual, physical, emotional, and so forth, neglect. They were exposed to disease. Children ran away. There was deaths, so forth. So a really, really, really dark history. And
this has led to a lot of intergenerational trauma because people who experienced this system, it still affects their third and fourth generation till now.
Yeah, and so I think Patrick Wolf, a settler scholar, talks about settler colonialism as a structure, not an event. That language is really important.
Yes.
And so, settlers, the difference between, you look at colonialism in, say, African countries, it's more that notion of imperialism, but whereas like here, settlers, they came to stay. So they built their own society on top of what was already there, right?
Well, we did have mosquitoes to help kick white people out. Just joking.
Yeah. And so I think that like is the specificity of that iteration of colonization is really important. And then, so intergenerational trauma is a huge part of that story. And also just how that's really important to notice. How does history show up in the present? And so we saw iterations of the Indian residential schools change form. So then it was like the 60s scoop where Indigenous children were placed with white foster families, right? And then, today's contemporary child welfare practices, we're still seeing those systems overrepresented in Indigenous families. And so that's why this conversation is so important because, and I don't know if you want to ask another question, but I'll just keep going.
Yeah, I want to ask the next question.
Okay, go.
Which ties to what you are saying. So considering that this research is with students who are in the social work class, what are the main things that you found with regards to how the process of decolonization and anti-racism pedagogy was used in the classroom? What are the main findings?
So the main findings, there were sort of three central things that really came out of this work. The first one being attention to one's position, social location, identity, personal bias. And I think it went like a little bit deeper than just like, here are the like markers of my identity. I felt that the student voices were very, they really went into like a self-exploration. Like there was meaning making in what they were finding out about their identity and how it impacted other people, right?
Yes. So, for instance, like students who are white, how their identity as somebody who has some level of privilege may impact like their relationship and work with people, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also find, like in this study, but just in my observations of courses in general, there's also like, students of color, Indigenous students, Black students too. It's very reflective for them too, because again, this like look at identity and how you move through the world. This isn't like a common practice with everyday people. I feel this is very social worker specific.
Yes.
And there's a lot of awareness that's built about like, okay, yeah, these are areas where I might face like oppression from certain systems, but also like really grappling with like, hey, I thought I faced all of this oppression, but I also have a lot of privilege in these areas. And interestingly, I think like students of color are really like strong in identifying their areas of privilege.
Yeah.
So, it's interesting in that way.
I mean, I would deny it if it was an argument of privilege, but I do recognize that I enjoy some level of privilege
Mhm.
because of my education and background and stuff like that. But I know that sometimes when we talk about privilege, we focus mostly on white people. And I know that systemically, white people have enjoyed more privilege than any other group, but it's also important for other people to recognize their privileges.
Yeah, absolutely. And more just like a point of like, how do we talk about like identity in a complex way? Like,
Hmm.
and oftentimes I think this is taught in sort of binary terms. Like, if you are a white person, everything is about privilege. If you are a person of color, everything's about oppression. And
Yeah,
that's just like, that really
that's
minimizes
not true.
complexity of human beings. And so we
Yeah,
need to do this work in more meaningful ways so that we humanize each other
yeah,
and also understand our implications.
yeah.
So yeah, so I feel like there was like this deepening awareness that was built in students. So that was one thing that really came through in the data. And then the piece about empathy and cultural humility. So, students are expressing like, I was reading some students talking about, I wanted to look away. I know this stuff exists, but I didn't want to look at it.
Yeah, you don't want to confront it,
Don't want to
deal with
confront it.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then this like, and I think this was the approach that we took in the class, which was sort of relationship based. We did a lot of like talking from our own positions and experiences, which aided in inviting other people to be vulnerable. But this, I think, encouraged, what we noticed was encouraged people to kind of say, okay, like I can actually look at this. This is like not as scary as maybe I expected, and I noticed like, hey, like there's so many people in this world. There's so many people in this classroom. There's people in the future I'm going to be working with from so many different backgrounds. And I might not know much about most of those, and sort of like a curiosity that emerged to want to know those stories.
Yeah.
So that was really positive. And the cultural humility piece is so critical in social work, and it's contrary to or expands on that notion of cultural competence, which is like this idea that we can know another culture. Critically, we say now like that's an impossibility.
I don't even completely know my culture. So how am I supposed to
Exactly.
know
And it
the cultures of diverse population that I serve?
Yeah, so it's like, how do we break down those like assumptions and just like lean into the individual that's in front of you, right?
Hmm.
That's the humility piece. So a lot of students talked about like this dawning humility that they were experiencing. And then the last piece was related to commitment to social change, which, again, is like, I think it's inspiring for us as educators to just see that in your students. Students just really being like, because, I think an important part of what this classroom is, it's foundational social work, but it's not just students that want to go into social work as a passion. It's students from all different backgrounds who might take it as an elective. So you could have a student who's like in biology
Hmm.
take course. So it's kind of an awesome opportunity, because someone who would like just randomly choose social work, they're going to actually be invited into sort of like an intense level of subject matter, right? Where you're really
Yeah.
having to know the self. But there was just like this in the narratives that we read, this like really beautiful commitment from students to be like, this is really important to me. Like, I want to know more. I want to like do this professionally, or if not professionally, in my personal life, I need to have more awareness, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And so that was really what came out in sort of the last set of findings.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for breaking the findings down.
Mhm.
So finally, within the next few minutes, because we're out of time, can you quickly tell us what you recommend? What are the implications of these findings? Because you've done this research, you found that a relational approach is good for teaching decolonization and anti-racist social work. So What are your recommendations?
Yeah, I think that like this approach still needs to be built upon in social work. I think like there's so many frameworks to explore oppression in social work. And I think we're just still figuring out like one thing we didn't talk about is like oftentimes decolonization and anti-racism kind of get like pushed together.
Yes.
But they're very much their own theoretical frameworks, ideas, ways of knowing. So how do we bring those together in meaningful ways? And like we found this way that we found effective. So like how can we build off of that? And how do we not water down different areas? Like how do we not water down anti-racism? How do we not water down decolonization? So I think just more research in that area is needed. Also just this like positive thing that came out of co-teaching. I think that it's unusual, but it's so beneficial, especially when we're talking about things related to identity. And having instructors with diverse identities is so beneficial. So I think just more research in that area would be great. And just overall, research in this area is burgeoning in social work, but it's still we still need a lot more. And so just to continue on in the area.
Thank you so much. I wanted to add, even though this wasn't part of the recommendations we had in the article, I was going to say that I feel like because I have my education from the UK, from Nigeria, and before here, I feel like there is so much to be done when it comes to decolonization and anti-racism within the social work classrooms in Nigeria from my own experience. So my additional recommendation is that social work curriculum in these places should invest more on understanding the importance of decolonization and anti-Black racism and anti-racism in general within the social work classroom. Because a lot of social work students who migrate from Africa, they start actually confronting the concept of decolonization and anti-racism when they go to classrooms outside of Africa. That's when they, have to grapple with this for the first time. So I think there is more to be done in that space. Well, thank you so much for your time, and it's really a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you so much, Prince. It's been great.